He shouldn't have been lying in the middle of the road. A 6-year-old yellow Labrador soaked in cold rain stretched across the faded lines outside Naperville like a toy someone had dropped and never turned back for. His chest dragged for air and his paws twitched as he stared into my headlights, too tired even to flinch. I was driving home from another empty show, trunk full of paintings nobody wanted, mind full of overdue bills. The smart thing would have been to keep going, to think, it's just a dog, and let the rain finish what the car had started. Then the Labrador tried to stand. He pushed up, slipped, and hit the asphalt with a dull thud I felt in my teeth. He lifted his head and turned it toward my taillights, waiting to see if I was the kind of man who stopped or the kind who didn't. My name is Richard. I paint pictures no one in Naperville seems to need, and I can't remember the last time I paid rent on time. I had no money for vets and no plan for tomorrow, but in that moment, every excuse felt smaller than the way this dog was breathing. I swung to the shoulder, heart pounding harder than the wipers. When I stepped into the light, the Labrador watched me come, whole body shaking, yellow fur plastered to his ribs. He was a heavy family dog, not a stray. "Hey, big guy," I whispered, kneeling into a puddle. My hands slid along his soaked neck and bumped into a thick band under the fur. Not cheap nylon, but real leather. The kind of collar you buy for a dog you love, not one you leave on a road. Somewhere, somebody had wanted this Labrador badly enough to dress him like that. Why he was alone tonight, I didn't know. I only knew one thing. If I walked back to my car and drove away, no one else was coming for him. He slept most of the ride back, his head pressed against the window glass, breath fogging the cold pane. Naperville was silent, rain still falling in threads that glowed under the streetlights. When I parked in front of the hardware shop, the Labrador stirred, gave one soft groan, and looked at me with those tired amber eyes that already felt like they knew me. Carrying him up those narrow stairs nearly dropped me. He was heavier than I thought, solid muscle under the wet fur, and every step felt like a small promise I couldn't take back. I laid him on the same blanket I used to cover my finished canvases, set the space heater close, and knelt beside him until the shivering slowed. Steam rose from his coat as it dried, the air thick with the smell of rain and iron and paint thinner. Claire had done what she could. Shots, bandages, pain meds, a warning about rest. Before leaving, she touched the dog's head once and said, "He's got fight in him. Don't let him sleep too cold." Then she slipped me a small bottle of pills and refused payment with a tired smile. I sat on the floor back against the wall, watching Dexter breathe. That name already felt too personal for a stranger's dog. The brass key Claire found on his collar lay on the table beside an empty mug, small, ordinary, and somehow full of questions. What kind of man sews a key into a collar? Outside, thunder rolled again, shaking the window. Dexter's ears twitched, but he didn't move closer to the door. He looked at me instead, as if waiting for what I'd decide next. I said, mostly to myself, "We'll figure this out, you and I." And for the first time in months, the word we didn't sound lonely. By noon, the smell of paint and rain had become the smell of home. Dexter slept through most of the afternoon, chest rising steady now, tail twitching at small dreams. I kept glancing his way, half afraid the peace would vanish if I looked too long. When he woke, I opened a can of food I'd bought on credit from the shop downstairs. He ate politely, almost shy, pausing after every few bites as if making sure I wasn't angry at him for it. Afterward, he padded to the easel and sat down facing the canvas, head tilted, waiting. That was all the permission I needed. I dipped my brush, pulled long strokes of color, yellows and ochres, softer than the gray streets I always painted. Dexter watched every move, following the motion of my wrist like a student trying to learn language. For hours we stayed like that, a man talking himself through paint, a dog quietly answering by just being there. When I finally stepped back, the shape on the canvas startled me. It wasn't another sad alley or bridge, it was light breaking through a storm over an open road. I hadn't planned it. It just happened, like finding him. Evening crept in, filling the room with blue shadow. Dexter came close, pressed his head against my arm, and let out a small sigh. That single sound felt like a promise that maybe we'd both been found. On the table, the brass key caught the last strip of sunlight. I turned it over in my hand, thinking how odd it was that something so small could feel like destiny waiting to be unlocked. "Tomorrow," I said softly. "Tomorrow we'll figure out where you came from." Dexter's tail brushed the floor once, slow and certain, as if to say he already knew. The next morning came soft and pale, sunlight pushing through the fog over Naperville. Dexter stood at the window beside me, steady on his paws now, tail moving slow and even. He watched the street below as though memorizing it, like he'd finally decided to stay. When I picked up a brush, he followed me, sitting a few feet away, eyes bright, ears flicking every time bristles touched canvas. It felt strange being watched with that kind of quiet faith. Each time I stepped back, he tilted his head, and I caught myself smiling at the idea that maybe he was judging my color choices. By midday, the room was heavy with paint fumes and the smell of drying fur. I opened the window just as a truck door slammed somewhere outside. Sharp, metallic, too loud. Dexter jumped, panic flashing across him like lightning. Before I could move, he knocked into the easel. The big canvas crashed face down, paint splattering across the floor, across me. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. Anger surged up, months of worry and failure boiling to the surface. Then I saw him crouched by the wall, shaking, ears back, eyes full of guilt. Not fear of pain, but fear of being sent away. It killed the anger instantly. I sank to my knees, reached for him, whispered, "It's okay, boy. It's just paint." He pressed his head against my chest and let out a long, quivering breath, and somehow it was me he was comforting. We sat like that until my heartbeat slowed. When I turned the canvas over, I saw something unexpected. The spill had created soft golden streaks through the gray, like morning light breaking through rain. I cleaned the brush and started again, following the accident instead of erasing it. Dexter nudged my hand now and then, as if insisting on more warmth, more yellow. By dusk, a new painting glowed on the easel, a road, wet with light, and the faint shape of a Labrador in the center. Dexter curled up beside me, fur dotted with blue paint. I whispered, "Not bad, partner." He sighed, eyes half closed, and for the first time, the studio felt like home. The metal box was heavier than it looked, cold even through the dirt. I wiped the surface with my sleeve until faint letters appeared. Nothing I could read, just time and rust. Dexter sat close, breathing fast, his nose twitching, as if the box still carried a scent he remembered. We carried it home together, me bent under the weight, him pacing beside me like a guard. Every few steps he glanced up, tail low, as if making sure I wouldn't drop it or change my mind. By the time we reached the studio, my arms burned, but I didn't care. I set the box on the table under the easel where our ruined and reborn painting now dried in soft golds and blues. The key still hung from Dexter's collar, dull brass against his yellow fur. I knelt to unclip it, feeling the cool metal in my palm. Everything in me said this was impossible, yet every line of the story so far had been impossible. Finding him, the key, now the box. Dexter waited, calm, eyes fixed on mine. The lock fit the key perfectly. I turned it once, slow. A click echoed through the room, sharper than it should have been, and the lid lifted a few inches. Inside lay a folded piece of paper, edges yellowed, resting on top of a sealed envelope. I unfolded the paper first. The handwriting was careful, shaky, written by someone who knew time was running out. "Whoever finds my Labrador, his name is Dexter. I am ill, and when he leaves this house, I may not be here anymore. He carries the key to what I could not say in person. Please use what you find to give him the life I won't be able to." My throat tightened. Dexter leaned forward, sniffed the note, then looked at me, waiting for something more. I reached for the envelope underneath. Inside was a bank check, $500,000, and one short line of instruction, present with code word Dexter's Road. Bank has been notified. I sat there for a long minute, holding both pieces of paper while the dog pressed his head against my knee. For once, I had nothing to paint, nothing to fix, just a story that had finally opened its lock. I should have left that rusted box under the tree. Most people would have called the park office, let someone in a uniform deal with it, and gone back to their own worries. But after a 6-year-old yellow Labrador dragged me off the path and dug it up like something he refused to forget, most people didn't feel like an option. I carried. He paced beside me, tail a nervous metronome, nails clicking on the path. By the time we reached the stairs to my studio, my arms shook, but his eyes never left my face, as if he was checking whether I'd changed my mind. On the table under the painting we had ruined and rebuilt, the box looked ancient. Rust flaked along the edges, the lock small but stubborn, like it had been waiting its whole life for one key. I knelt beside Dexter, slid my fingers under his worn leather collar, and unclipped the tiny brass key he'd been carrying since before we met. The key slid in smoothly. One soft turn, one tired click, and the lid gave way. Inside lay a folded letter on top of a sealed envelope. I opened the letter. The handwriting trembled, but the message was clear. An older man, Dexter's owner, wrote that he was seriously ill, his life hanging by a single thread. He was afraid he would die before he could find someone he trusted to care for his Labrador, so he made a plan only a lonely, desperate person would make. If you are reading this, you have already done what I prayed someone would do. You stopped for my dog. Beneath this note is a check for $200,000 and instructions for the bank. The money will be released only to the person who comes in with Dexter and says the code words, Dexter's Road. I wasn't the kind of man people trusted with that kind of money. I was the guy painting empty streets over a hardware store, living month to month, hoping the landlord forgot which day it was. A small, ugly thought slipped in. What if this is too big for you? What if you mess it up? What if someone looks at this dog and decides he belongs to papers and signatures, not to you? The bank in downtown Naperville looked like another planet. Polished floors, high ceilings, people who smelled like expensive soap instead of turpentine. Dexter's nails clicked on the tile as we walked in, drawing a few raised eyebrows and one small smile from a woman in line. At the counter, I slid the letter and the check toward the teller. My name is Richard Collins, I said. I was told there are instructions connected to this account. Her eyes moved from the paper to the name Dexter on the note, then down to the dog at my side. Something in her face softened. A manager appeared, then another. Soon we were in a glass office. The city shrunk to reflections on the window. Through the glass, I caught pieces of their murmurs. Estate, no living relatives, pet provision, held funds. One of them glanced at Dexter the way people look at something that belongs on a form, not on a leash. For one cold second, I saw the scene in my head, a polite smile and a sentence that would break me. Legally, the dog must stay with us. My hand slid into Dexter's collar and stayed there. If they said that, I knew exactly what I would do. Walk out with him and leave the money sitting in that box of theirs. I'd already chosen the dog once, without knowing there was a price tag attached. Finally, a man in a dark tie sat down across from me, folded his hands, and looked straight into my face. Mr. Collins, he said quietly, do you know the code words associated with this instruction? My throat went dry. Dexter pressed his side against my leg, solid and warm. Dexter's Road, I managed. The room went very still. The funds are valid, he said. The client left clear instructions. The money is to be released to the person who came in with Dexter and used that phrase. There are no other claimants. The money would change my life, that much was obvious. But I realized something heavier. My life had already changed on the night I hit the brakes. When it was over, they shook my hand like I'd done something brave. All I'd really done was stop for a dog. At first, I did the obvious things. I paid the rent I owed on the studio, cleared the credit cards, bought groceries without counting every dollar twice. I replaced the space heater that smelled like burning dust. For one afternoon, I let myself breathe like a man who wasn't inches from losing everything. A small voice in my head kept saying, "You've earned this. You carried him off the road. You sat through the night when his lungs rattled." It was tempting to listen. For a few hours, I did. Dexter snored softly at my feet. When I looked down, he lifted his head and laid it on my boot, warm and heavy. In that small weight was the answer. If I turned this into a story about luck and nothing else, I'd be smaller than the man in that letter believed I could be. The next morning, I walked into the shelter on the edge of Naperville and handed over a check big enough to make the director step into the hallway and wipe her eyes. I told her a sick man and his Labrador had asked me to. We set up food funds, medical funds, a little bit of breathing room for dogs who had never seen a warm couch. Life didn't turn into a fairy tale. It turned into something better than fear. I still lived above the hardware store. I still ruined paintings and started over. But now there were bags of good food stacked for Dexter, and envelopes each month for the rescue groups who pulled dogs off highways like the one where I'd found him. A small gallery downtown took a chance on my work. We hung the canvas he'd knocked over and helped repaint right in the center. A yellow Labrador on a wet road, a brass key on his collar catching a line of light. A woman bought it for $4,000 and said it made her feel less alone. I thought, me too. People call it luck now. What happened to me? I don't. I call it the night I finally hit the brakes for a dog. If you ever see a Labrador or any scared dog standing alone by the road, I hope you remember Dexter's Road. Share his story if you can. Somewhere out there, another driver is deciding whether to look away. Sometimes the life you save is your own.